Hello and welcome back to the Engage 8 podcast. I'm Josh with my co-host Mike. Today we are tackling the AFC and NFC South previews. We will start with the AFC South. As always, we will talk about the team's off seasons in general, as well as projecting them for next season, giving standing predictions and awards for every division. Starting off here with the Tennessee Titans. Their adds were Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, Calvin Ridley, L'Jarius Sneed, Lloyd Cushenberry, Chidobe Awuzie, Kenneth Murray, Tony Pollard, Sebastian Joseph Day, and J.C. Latham. Their biggest losses were Ryan Tannehill, Azeez Al-Shaair, Danico Autry, Sean Murphy-Bunting, of course, Derrick Henry, and Aaron Brewer. Will Levis is locked in as the starter in year one. He definitely showed flashes last year. We're expecting to see some improvement for him as time goes on. He gets blessed with one of the better wide receiver cores in football with Ridley and D-Hop as his wide receiver 1 and 2, and great depth pieces like Boyd and Burks for wide receiver 3 and 4. Left side of the O-line with Latham, Skronsky, and Cushenberry is really good. Left to center, I should say, is really, really good. Their right side, though, is pretty bad. Overall, their defense is a little bit more questionable than their offense, in my opinion. Their front seven to their secondary just overall is just average on both ends. They don't have really many strengths on defense. I think Levis could have a very good year, but I am worried about the defense and the lack of run game with him. I could see this being like a spoiler team. I think they're going to be about average like they were last year, but I think they're going to have some matchups late in the season where they can win games that people don't think they're going to win because of how talented their offense is. If their defense could even be kind of solid, I could see this team being about average, but I'm worried about their defense. I'm worried about the right side of their O-line, but overall, I think they have the pieces for Will Levis to have a much improved season.
Yeah, very interesting. They had an offseason where they brought in a lot of guys, and just random thought looking through their roster, they don't, considering looking at their starters, they don't have many of these guys that they actually drafted and developed as their starters. They got Skronsky, Latham now, and Will Levis on the offensive side, but Chigo Kwanko, I guess, as well. Not too many, though. They brought in a lot of weapons, Ridley, Hopkins, and Boyd now for Will Levis. That's a solid trio for him. You just mentioned Treylon Burks at 4. They bring in Tony Pollard as well to have a little bit of a running back duo in Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. I think that'll be solid for them. Offensively, it really all kind of lies on Will Levis. They need him to continue to improve. Last season, he was ranked as PFF's 32nd ranked quarterback out of 45. 8 touchdowns, 4 picks, completed just under 60% of his passes for about 7.09 yards per attempt. He had a solid rookie season. He showed flashes. He had games where he looked very good. He had times where he did not look very good. He took too many hits. He needs to be more careful of his body. He'll run with the ball. He can be very mobile, but kind of like Anthony Richardson, he doesn't get as much as Anthony Richardson did, but he needs to slide more, avoid those big hits. He's the main piece for this team. He needs to stay healthy. Defensively, they got rid of some of their holes that they struggled with last season. Their interior D-line, outside of Jeffrey Simmons, they bring in Tavondre Sweat from the draft. I think that's a very good signing for them. They bring in Kenneth Murray to help the linebacker core a little bit. And in the secondary, they were able to bring in L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie, which is a solid cornerback duo and definitely an upgrade. They bring in Quandre Diggs as a safety as well, like you had mentioned. This team, overall, I kind of view them as mid as well, 8-9, 9-8. I think them and the Jags are kind of similar. Every team in this division could be better than expected, maybe make the playoffs, but I don't see that from this Titans team.
All right, moving on here to the Colts. I'll be brief with the Colts and let you say what you have to say. But they did not have a very eventful offseason at all. They only lose Gardner Minshew and Zach Moss, which is 2 virtually ineffective losses. Their only real big add is Raekwon Davis, who should definitely help them with some injuries. They also have Joe Flacco, who could help as a backup if anything happens to Anthony Richardson. And then they have a great draft, which is the highlight of their offseason for me. I think they had a very high ceiling draft. Guys like Latu and A.D. Mitchell have potential to be really, really good in this league if things go right for them. So I like the Colts going high ceiling draft when they already have a very talented roster. Despite not adding many guys, I did re-sign and extend multiple guys. Pittman, Buckner, Stewart, Franklin, and Kenny Moore were all re-signed or extended this year. Their O-line last season got back to normal after a rough 22. They are back to a top 3 at least O-line in the league. Their wide receiver core is very good. Pittman, Downs, Mitchell, Pierce is pretty solid. I'm a little bit worried about if somebody gets hurt in this receiving core, having to have a guy like Pierce step up and be a every snap wide receiver would definitely hurt them. So I'm worried about the fact that somebody could get hurt. And after Pittman, Downs, Mitchell, and Pierce, there are question marks there. As far as Taylor and Richardson, they should both have great years on the ground if they could stay healthy. On defense, their front seven is very solid and definitely could be the highlight of this team as a whole. Their secondary has solid pieces, but now that guys like Brent and Cross have to start, we don't fully know how that's going to go. Their secondary definitely could be a weakness for them, especially with the youth. This team has potential to be very good, but health and youth are two big factors for them. If they can stay healthy and have those young guys in their secondary play well, I could see them winning this division and being a really good team. But those are two big ifs. Regardless, I think they have so much talent. I think they're going to be a good team.
I agree. I think they're going to be a good team, but I think they're going to have games where they, or at least halves, maybe only quarters, that they look like a very bad team. I think Anthony Richardson's going to have a good season, but I think there's going to be times during the season where AR looks like he's not an NFL quarterback. People are going to hate on him. But I think overall he's going to have more positives than negatives. But we've seen today in training camp, he had a rough start to the day. He finished pretty well. The offense as a whole struggled. He's going to have moments where he looks great and moments where he looks rough. I love that he gets to finally be with Jonathan Taylor, who they didn't really play much last season, only 2 snaps together. That could be one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL, at least top 3, top 5 with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. You have Trey Sermon as well, who can be very good. We have a good receiving core with Pittman, Downs, and Mitchell. Alec Pierce can step in for AD Mitchell. Ashton Doolin's coming off of a torn ACL where he's had some moments where he's looked like he could be a very good depth receiver. And Anthony Gold, a late round draft pick, has shown some pretty nice flashes in preseason games. And then there's the offensive line, which I have no worries about. They were a top 3, top 5 unit last season, and they bring back the entire same starting 5 in Raymond Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, and Braden Smith. They drafted Bordeloni, who could be a nice depth piece, maybe if Ryan Kelly decides to retire after the season, as a backup center, and Matt Gonsalves could be a nice tackle if Blake Freeland doesn't kind of work out as a backup tackle. So they have depth on the O-line as well. Tight end, Jelani Woods, who was supposed to be a guy I was really excited for, is out now for a while with a toe injury. He's going to need surgery on it. But you still got Kylan Granson, Mo Alley Cox, and Drew Ogletree, who could be a solid trio for Anthony Richardson. Defensively, you said it, the front seven can be very good. Zaire Franklin's a very good linebacker. EJ Speed's a good guy with him as well. Segun Ulobi has really developed into kind of a very solid linebacker as well. And on the D-line, you got a lot of good pieces in Tyquan Lewis, Kwity Paye, Laiatu Latu now. And then at D-tackle, Buckner and Grover Stewart's one of the best duos. And you have Raekwon Davis and Ade Ade, who are 2 very good depth pieces. The only issue I have with this team as a whole is the secondary. You got Kenny Moore back there, and Julian Blackman, who are the 2 guys I really only trust. Juju Brents has been banged up and struggling a little bit in camp. Jalen Jones, he's been one of their better cornerbacks overall, but he still was a late round draft pick. He was good last season. And Nick Cross has been very up and down as the starting free safety. The secondary, they could be exposed in a lot of games, especially against a team like the Houston Texans, which we saw last season, maybe a team like the Jaguars. But I think overall, the defensive line is very good. They broke the sack record for the Colts last season. I think this defense is going to be solid. I wish they would have brought in a guy like L'Jarius Sneed, Justin Simmons, or Quandre Diggs, but they decided to pass, and we'll see if that hurts them. I'm just mostly excited to see Anthony Richardson with this offense. I hope he can stay healthy. This is the first time in at least 5 or 6 years where the Colts have had one quarterback start back-to-back seasons. Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan. It's been a long stretch, and hopefully Anthony Richardson can be the answer. It's still yet to see, though. He still is very young. He needs to develop.
Yeah, the Colts have a lot of how do I put it? A lot of things that can go either way for them. Their young players could play amazing, and they could be one of the better teams in the league. Their players that they need to stay healthy could stay healthy, and they could be one of the best teams in the league. But there's also the flip side of that. There's the world where one of their impact players can't stay healthy, or there's the world where their guys like Brents and Cross cannot play to the ability that they need them to play, and then I think that could definitely be an issue for them. So I think the Colts are a very volatile team going into this year, but I think as a fan, anytime that you have potential to be really good is something to be excited about.
And Anthony Richardson could be shit. We don't know.
Yeah,
hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
I'm gonna knock on wood.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I have this assumption in my head that he's going to be good just based off how he started last year, but I guess you can't be completely sure of that because it was 2 games or a game and a half.
3. They're 3-2.5.
Yeah, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Only hope.
Who do they open week 1 with at Jacksonville?
No, Houston at home, I think.
Okay, that'll be a fun game.
Big
But
game.
moving on here, they usually beat Houston at home though, don't they?
No, we beat Houston at Houston.
Oh, okay, that's what it is. Okay, I know they just suck in Jacksonville.
We own Houston in Houston. They kind of own us in Indy.
They own you guys in Indy.
A little bit, not too much. Not as much as we own them in Houston.
What's the deal with the Titans?
50. Well, we used to own the Titans. I mean, Andrew Luck was 11-0 against the Titans. We used to own them. We're kind of 50-50 with them now. And then the Jags just fuck. Jags own us, unfortunately. Rough team to have
even
on.
in Indy. I know they own you guys in Jacksonville. They own you in Indy too.
I think we've last beat them in 2021
Really?
with Carson
It's been
Wentz.
that long?
Well, we were really bad the one year where they were okay, and then
Yeah,
last year they played us twice in like the first 6 weeks, and they got us then when we were struggling.
Yeah. Right.
We'll beat them this year. I'm not worried. Maybe not in Jacksonville. If we beat them in Jacksonville, we're on pace for a great season.
Yeah, I think they very well could. Moving on to Jacksonville, speaking of, their biggest ads were Eric Armstead, Gabe Davis, Darnell Savage Jr., Mitch Morse, Devin Duvernay, Ronald Darby, Mac Jones, and Brian Thomas, who they drafted in the first round. They lose Calvin Ridley. Of course, they replaced him with Brian Thomas Jr. They lose Rayshon Jenkins, Darius Williams, and Florenzo Fatukasi, interior defensive lineman. Weapons are solid with ETN, Kirk, Davis, and Thomas, but Lawrence just has to be better after the Giant extension. They really had no choice but to extend him. There wasn't really another option. A lot of teams face that in the modern NFL with quarterbacks making so much money. When you have a guy that's even solid and has potential to be good, when it's time to lock him up, you kind of have to. That's how I felt about Jalen Hurts a couple of years ago, and I still think Jalen Hurts is in a good situation where he's going to end up being good, but I don't know if he's worth all the money he's getting. That's neither here nor there. We're not doing the East preview today. We're doing the South. But Armstead is a huge ad for Jacksonville. He's a great D lineman. He's going to make an impact. Him and Josh Hines Allen are going to be a good duo together on the D line. The O line has a few pieces that are solid, but it seems like it may be a big weakness of this team. I definitely do not think they have a good O line by any means. Mediocre is even maybe a little bit of a stretch at times. Like I said, with Allen and Armstead, they also have Walker to make a great trio on the D line. Their pass rush should be solid. Probably the number one strength of this team will be their pass rush and possibly their run defense. I expect that to be elite from them. Their secondary, though, is definitely concerning for me. They got a few free agent pieces back on the back end, and they need them to all perform, especially guys like Darnell Savage Jr., especially guys like Darby. Those are the guys that they need to perform. Similar to the Colts, they have the opportunity to be a good team if they can have guys like Darby and Savage step up and make them have a good secondary. Because if they have a good secondary, they're going to have a great defense as a whole. And then you can look past the fact that they're going to have a bad O-line and we don't know how their run game is going to be. If their defense is elite, that can make up for it. Unfortunately, I think the secondary is going to be an issue. I think the O-line is going to be a glaring issue. And this team is just nowhere near complete as we thought they might be a couple years ago.
Yeah, they struggled towards the end of last season very bad. They were great at the start of the season, finished 1-5. They were one of the worst collapses of the season. Maybe not the worst, but actually they missed the playoffs. I'd say maybe they were the worst. Trevor Lawrence was having a solid season, and then
I'd argue Philly still though.
I mean, Philly at least made the playoffs.
Well, they started 10-1. They were gonna make the playoffs. It was gonna be pretty tough.
The Jags had a chance to make the playoffs just with a win against Tennessee and blew it, which was just music to my ears to watch that happen. But they finished 1-5. Just an absolute collapse. Trevor Lawrence was banged up and he was not playing good football at all. He's definitely underachieved so far in his career, in my opinion. He should have been a top 5 quarterback, top 10 quarterback. I don't know if I would put him in the top 10 right now. Travis Etienne, he's been all right. I still expect more from him as well. He's been very touchdown dependent so far in his career. The receiving core is maybe the best Trevor Lawrence has had in his career now with Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Brian Thomas Jr. Those are 3 guys who are very good. And then Evan Engram as well. I'm very high on Brian Thomas Jr. I think he's going to be good. But that offensive line, just not great. I think overall, this offense is going to kind of be if Trevor Lawrence can play how he was at the start of last season and be able to just win them games. Defensively, they have a new defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen. They used last year's defensive coordinator as a scapegoat. Their D line is very solid, can be great with Josh Hines, Allen, Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton, and Trayvon Walker off the edge, who was former number 1 overall pick, Trayvon Walker. Linebackers are solid with Foyesade Olokun. I think he's very good. Devin Lloyd. But a secondary is a big question mark. I think their secondary could struggle a lot. Tyson Campbell is good, but I'm not very high on the rest of them. I think Darnell Savage could be okay. And when you look at the teams that they have to play, especially before their bye week 12, Miami, great passing offense. Buffalo could be a great passing offense. Houston, phenomenal passing offense. Bears, Green Bay, Philadelphia, and Detroit all before the bye. Those are some offenses that I think are going to be able to dominate this defense. And with getting themselves in that big of a hole, I don't know if they'll be able to climb out of it or not. So it's going to be interesting. I think they'll kind of be battling the Titans there from maybe the 3rd and 4th spot. I don't think they added enough in the secondary.
Yep, I completely agree with that. Moving on here to the last team, the Houston Texans. Were the talk of the offseason, one of the most hyped up teams heading into this year, mainly because they added 3 huge names in Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, and Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, in my opinion, is a name. Do I think he's going to be an insanely effective ad? I don't personally. I do think Hunter and Diggs will be. They also had Aziz Al-Shair, Danico Autry, Florenzo Fatukasi, Tommy Townsend, and they drafted Kamari Lassiter from Georgia with their 2nd-round pick. They lose Grenard, Rankins, and Collins, which are 3 huge losses for them that no one is really talking about. They also lose Blake Cashman, Devin Singletary, Steven Nelson, and George Fant. Like I said, because of the ads with Diggs, Hunter, and Mixon, they are a super hyped up team. I think some of it is valid. I think some of it is kind of just the media hype. Some parts that I think are valid is definitely their wide receiver core. It's very, very deep, maybe the deepest in the league. They have Robert Woods at wide receiver 5 and Noah Brown at wide receiver 4, making this a super, super deep unit. And then, of course, Diggs, Collins, and Dell as their one. Sorry, Dell. It should be Diggs, Dell, and Collins as their 1, 2, and 3 receivers. Their O line is average at best. I think they're going to really struggle to run the ball again, even with Mixon, which is something they wanted to improve on with getting Mixon. But I think they're still going to struggle. We know that didn't affect CJ Stroud too much last year, but you have to be able to run the ball in this league. We've seen a lot of teams like the Houston, like Tampa Bay, who found their demise in the playoffs because they couldn't run the ball despite how good their passing offense was. Their secondary has some pieces, but they are very thin. Lassiter is probably going to start for them. They need him to be good. If he can be good, that's going to do a world of a difference for this secondary and this defense as a whole. Their interior defensive line is average when they lose guys like Rankins and Collins, but they have Anderson and Hunter on the 2 edges, and I think those 2 guys are going to feast. They both get to play with the best edge rusher they play with in their career, probably. And I still think this team is great, and I think they're going to win the division. But I'm just not as high on them as others are because there are teams like the Lions and like the 49ers and like the Chiefs and like the Ravens to some extent that are really, really good teams. And those are the most hyped up teams for a reason because they have the least amount of holes. The Texans are very hyped up because they have a quarterback in CJ Stroud who's entering year 2 and is probably already top 5. And they added 3 huge names in Hunter, Diggs, and Mixon. So I understand why they're so hyped up. But those same people talking about those moves aren't talking about the fact that they lost Grenard, Rankins, and Collins, and the fact that from O-line to secondary to even interior defensive line to some extent, this team has some holes. Regardless, I think they're going to be a good team, but I'm just not as high on them as others.
Yeah, I think they're going to be very good, but I do kind of agree. Some of that struggle, I guess, would be because of the schedule that they have to play with. They finished first in their division. They won the South last season. And that means they have to play Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, Aaron Rodgers, Tua Tagovailoa, Jordan Love, Jared Goff, Caleb Williams, and then Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and Trevor Lawrence all twice, the last 3 there because of the division. They have a very tough schedule, one of the hardest in the leagues overall. But hopefully CJ Stroud for them can manage to be as good as he was last season. Last year, he joined Joe Montana and Tom Brady as the only quarterbacks in the last 50 years to lead the NFL in passing yards per game and touchdown to interception ratio. He did that as a rookie with not the best receiver core, was dominating with Nico Collins and Noah Brown, basically. And now he's able to throw it to Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell is back healthy. They got Robert Woods back. They still got Noah Brown there. This is the best receiving core in this is better than the receiving core last year, and he dominated last season. They have a running back in Joe Mixon, which is better than Dameon Pierce and what they had last season in Devin Singletary. So the run game should be a little bit better. Their offensive line is more towards the pass blocking as opposed to run blocking, but the run game should be better, and Mixon should be good to receive out of the backfield. Defensively, well, last thing on their offense, their biggest ad, it wasn't an ad, but they were able to keep their offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick. He was huge to this offense. He's one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL now. Him and Ben Johnson are probably the two best in the entire NFL, and they were able to keep him just like the Lions were able to keep Ben Johnson, which could keep this offense at the elite level that they were. Defensively, the secondary is a little bit of the question mark. Can they keep up with some of those big offenses they have to play? They do have DeMeco Ryans, who's a great defensive coach. They got some good linebackers. Aziz Al-Shaair was with DeMeco in San Francisco. They got Christian Harris still. That'll be good. They were able to bring in Danielle Hunter to go on the other side of Will Anderson, which could be very scary to see. They got Danico Autry, who should miss 3 or 4 games due to a suspension, which is very unfortunate for him. Well, it's not because he took performance-enhancing drugs, but it's unfortunate to the Texans overall. I think their interior D-line, it's not as good as it was last season, but I think it'll be okay enough to get the job done. It is still the best roster probably now in the division. They got depth at corner, even if they're not the best corners. They have C.J. Henderson, Jeff Okudah, Stingley, and Desmond King, and then Kamari Lassiter, who I think is going to, like you said, is going to have to be a very big piece for them. They still got Jimmy Ward and Jalen Peachy. So they got some good safeties. Overall, this defense, I think, is going to be enough to get the job done. They broke the franchise record last season with 46 sacks, and they bring in Danielle Hunter. So I think it's the best team in the division, but with some of the teams they have to play, it might hurt them.
All right. Speaking of the division, we will move into division standing predictions. Before I get into this, I want to say that I think this may be the most underrated division in the league. They get a ton of credit for having all of these young quarterbacks in Richardson, Stroud, Lawrence, and Levis, but they don't get credit for how good all 4 of these teams can be as a whole. I think the teams that have a chance to win this division are, of course, the Texans, and I also think the Colts, like I said earlier, there are multiple things that can go right or wrong for the Colts, but not as many as a lot of other teams have. They have a few things that if they go right, they could definitely win the division. So I think the Colts and the Texans are the 2 teams that can win this division without needing something drastic to happen. Teams like the Jags and the Titans, I think, would probably need a major injury for the Colts or the Texans to hop them, or have some guys completely overperform that we did not see coming whatsoever, whether it's a veteran that hasn't been playing well that gets back to their old self, or a young player that comes out of nowhere and ends up being good. I think that's the only way that the teams like the Jags or the Titans can win. But regardless, those teams like the Jags and the Titans can win the division because they have enough solid players and not a ton of massive holes like a lot of other teams have in this league, that I think makes this division very underrated and complete as a whole. With that being said, I do have the Titans at 4th, the Jags at 3, the Colts at 2, and the Texans at 1.
Yeah, I have the Texans at 1. I think they have the best roster overall. Maybe they have the best quarterback in the division with C.J. Stroud. He has the best weapons. I think they'll win this division. I think it might be a little close, so I have the Colts at 2. They have a lot of upside. They could also finish last. I think the Colts could be they could win or lose the division. I think that with all 3 of these teams, Colts, Jags, or Titans, I think they all have a small chance to win the division, but I think they also all have a small chance to lose the division. But I trust the Colts coaching and overall, so I have them at 2nd, the Jags at 3rd, and the Titans at 4th. I have the Jags and Titans basically in the similar/same light. Titans have a first-time head coach with Brian Callahan from the Bengals. He doesn't have an offensive coordinator, which is interesting for a first-time head coach. He's going to assume all the OC jobs. But I trust the Jags to just finish ahead of them and the Titans to finish last.
For that reason, expect maybe some game management issues early on with the Titans.
Mm-hmm.
But moving on here to our division awards, and I think we're probably gonna have some similar ones here. At Offensive Rookie of the Year, I was between the 2 wide receivers and Mitchell and Brian Thomas Jr., but I went with Brian Thomas Jr. I think he has a better chance to be wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville than Mitchell does to be wide receiver 1 in Indianapolis. For that reason, I think he's going to get more targets, more attention overall, and be able to produce better stats for that reason. I think they're both super talented. I think they both can be really good in this league. But as far as this year, I think Brian Thomas is going to have more opportunities, and I have him at Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I also have Brian Thomas Jr. at Offensive Rookie of the Year. I have him and AD Mitchell kind of close, but I think he'll be on the field more than AD Mitchell. AD Mitchell is going to have to compete with Alec Pierce early in the season, where I think Brian Thomas Jr., I've seen a lot of the camp from him and stuff as well, that he's been doing very well. I think he's going to be very good for this Jags team and maybe become Trevor Lawrence's number one option kind of quickly.
Yep. Defensive Rookie of the Year. Not a ton of options here, but we do have the highest defensive player drafted in the 2024 draft in the entire league in Latu Latu. That's who I have at Defensive Rookie of the Year. If he stays healthy, he can be great. He's probably the most talented edge rusher to come out of the draft this year. The back issue is concerning as it is with any young player overall. There's a point where he didn't think he was going to play football again, and now he went from that to being drafted in the first round and being the highest defensive player taken. I think he has all the potential in the world to be a really, really good edge rusher. I hope for his sake he can be healthy. And if he is, I think he'll easily be the best defensive rookie in this division.
Yeah, this was the easiest one for me. I have Latu Latu. I actually gave a small thought to give him at DPOY, but I'm just going to stick with Defensive Rookie of the Year here. He's going to be on the field a lot with the injury to Samson Ebukam. I think he's going to be very good. He was a top draft pick for a reason. He was very good out of college. A lot of buzz coming from him out of camp that he's been dominating the left side of our D line. I think he's going to have a big season, put up some big numbers, and I think he's going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year in the entire league pretty easily. I have Latu Latu from the Colts.
All right, moving on to Offensive Player of the Year. I have Jonathan Taylor, like I said, for every reason I said before. He has Anthony Richardson, who's a running quarterback. Any good running back in this league can benefit from a quarterback that can take it themselves and take the attention away from them. He also has a top 3 O-line in the league, which is going to put him in a great position to succeed. We saw him be the best running back in the league just a couple of years ago, and here he is again in a great position with a great O-line and a good running quarterback. Where I think he's going to be super, super successful. And if he can stay healthy, he can be in contention for Offensive Rookie of the or Offensive Player of the Year in the NFL.
Yeah, I have Jonathan Taylor as well. I think he's going to be one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. I think he's going to be right up there with CMC. The only thing I think CMC has on him is really the passing threat. I think Jonathan Taylor will be in the passing game a lot this season, just not as much as CMC. This offensive line is completely back from what it was last year, and we saw at the end of the season, Jonathan Taylor started taking over in the running game with the Colts. I think that's just going to continue, and now with the threat of Anthony Richardson, it's just going to get even better. I think he's going to have close to what he had in 2021 or whatever year that was, where he dominated the ground, and I think he could lead the NFL in rushing yards again. So I have him as my Offensive Player of the Year.
All right, moving on to DPOY. There's a ton of options at this position. You have Will Anderson, you have Danielle Hunter, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead, Jefferson. There's a ton of options here at DPOY, but I ended up going with Will Anderson Jr. just because I think I was between him and Danielle Hunter. But the more I think about it, the more I think that he could end up having the better year of the two. He's entering the second year of his career. He's going to learn a ton from Danielle Hunter just being around him and practicing with him. And I think Danielle Hunter, because at this point he's the bigger name, I think he's going to get more attention from O-lines, leaving Will Anderson opportunities to just be dominant as he continues to improve. I think he's going to take a huge leap this year, and I think he's going to be looked at as one of the best young edge rushers in the league. Do I think he's probably going to be in that top 5 conversation because it's so deep? Probably not, but I think he can be around like the Aiden Hutchinson range of like 6 to 10.
I have DeForest Buckner, defensive tackle for the Colts. He's going to have Grover Stewart for hopefully the entire season this year. And when Grover Stewart's on the field, that helps him a lot. He can focus on some of the pass rush and get to the quarterback. I think he's going to have a big season in tackle for loss. I think he might lead the NFL in sacks as a defensive tackle. I'm very high on DeForest Buckner. I think he's going to have a big season. I have DeForest Buckner as my Defensive Player of the Year.
All right, finishing off the division awards here in the AFC South with MVP, I, of course, have CJ Stroud. Although I was critical of his team when we were talking about the Texans, I do still believe he is a top 5 quarterback in this league. I have him there. He has the rare ability to always be looking for a big play and throwing a lot of deep balls while also being one of the lowest interception rate quarterbacks in the league. Even guys like Patrick Mahomes, and we see it a ton with Josh Allen, like to throw deep, like to take chances, but throw a lot of picks. I think CJ Stroud being able to do that and not throw a ton of picks is really remarkable Could he not do that this season after doing it last year? Absolutely. But at the same time, I think what we saw last year is enough for me to confirm that I think he's going to be the MVP of this division.
Yeah, I have CJ Stroud for all the reasons you listed. I think he's going to be the MVP of this division. I think he's going to, this is the best receiving core he's had. I think the offensive line will hold up for him. He's got to go against some tough defenses, but I think he's going to be the MVP of this division, and I think he'll be contending for the MVP of the entire NFL. So I got CJ Stroud.
All right. Now moving on to the NFC South, starting off with the New Orleans Saints. They, like the Colts, did not have a super eventful offseason in adds or losses. Their biggest adds were Chase Young, Willie Gay Jr., Cedric Wilson Jr., and they drafted Tyrese Fuaga, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and of course, Spencer Rattler in the third round. Cannot forget that absolute gem. They lose Jameis Winston, their backup quarterback. That's where Spencer Rattler slides in. Malcolm Roach, Lonnie Johnson Jr., and Andrews Pete. Their biggest loss of the offseason, though, was a guy that's still on their team, and Ryan Ramczyk. He's going to be out for the year. And this, without him, they have to start penning. They're going to have to start the rookie in Fuaga. I think that's going to make them one of, if not the worst offensive lines in the entire league, which definitely concerns me with Derek Carr. The Carr brothers are used to having shitty O-lines and used to getting sacked a ton, but regardless, that doesn't make it any better. As far as weapons, they do have Kamara, Olave, Shaheed. Those are great weapons for them, but Carr's not going to have a ton of time in the pocket at all. On the defensive end, they have big names like Cam Jordan, Lattimore, Davis, and Tyrann Mathieu. Those are the highlights of their defense, but those guys are all surrounded by a ton of mediocre players. The secondary, I think, is going to be solid, but the pass rush is going to really struggle. Cam Jordan's going to face a multiple double teams because the rest of his D-line is not good at all. I expect significant regression from the Saints this year, and I haven't fully decided what my standings of this division are going to be yet, but I'm definitely considering the Saints for last.
Yeah, I know what team I'm putting at first. Other than that, I have no clue what to do with this division. Yeah. Their big addition outside of the ones you mentioned was offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak from the 49ers. He was the passing game coordinator for, I think, just one season. And like normal, they get plucked away as quickly as possible from Kyle Shanahan and his San Francisco coaching tree. This offense was actually numbers-wise solid last year. They finished 11th in passing yards per game, 9th in scoring, but they had moments during the season where the offense was abysmal and just couldn't move through pretty much the entire game. They finished the season strong. Carr finished the season strong as well. He finished with a 14-2 passing to touchdown interception ratio in their last 5 games, which kind of came out of nowhere because of the struggles that they were having. But I think the offense did take a step back from that. I think Clint Kubiak's an upgrade, but just looking at the receiving core, I like Olave, I like Rashid Shaheed, but I'm not a big fan of A.T. Perry and Cedric Wilson and Equanimeous St. Brown. Some of the depth there is a little scary. They are going to have Alvin Kamara, I think, for most of the season. They still have Jamal Williams, but you touched on it. The offensive line here is abysmal. Ryan Ramczyk's injury, I think it's possible career ending. They might not come back for ever. So just not a fan of this offensive line at all. I think that's going to struggle. I don't think this offensive line is going to, this offense as a whole is going to do great, and they're close to what they did last year. I think they'll be towards the bottom. And I've seen a lot of Saints fans be very excited, actually, for, you mentioned his name, Spencer Rattler, saying they might want him to come in halfway through the season and start a couple games for him. But
my God,
that'd be electric, though, seeing Spencer Rattler play in the NFL.
Our number one overall recruit. People forget.
Yeah, TV show legend.
People forget him and Fields.
Yeah,
both gonna have great NFL careers.
This defense last year was pretty good, a top 10 scoring defense, but they were very bad at getting to the quarterback. Just 118 pressures and 34 sacks, both bottom 5 in the NFL. A lot of older guys on the team that are leading the defense, and Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu. But you still got some guys like Marshawn Lattimore. You draft a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry, who I think could be very good for them as well. And they bring in Chase Young as a guy who can get to the quarterback. But I don't think this defense, I don't think it's going to be as good as it was last year as well. I think this team's just going to take a step back as a whole, and I don't really know what to think of them, but I do not think they make the playoffs.
Moving on here to the Atlanta Falcons, they, of course, add Kirk Cousins, recently added Matthew Judon, Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore, Ray McLeod, Justin Simmons, and they, of course, drafted Michael Penix Jr. and Rook Aurora Clemson. They lose the man of the hour, Jeff Okudah, Jonnu Smith, Bud Dupree, Cordell Patterson, Matt Collins, Calais Campbell, and Desmond Ritter. The Penix pick was questionable, but it makes sense looking back as an insurance plan if they need out after year 2 of Cousins. Another year for them of having one of the best O-lines in football. Between the Lions, Eagles, Colts, and Falcons, those are easily the top 4 in my opinion. Cousins is surrounded by a great O-line and great weapons in Pitts, Robinson, and London. So it's very, very hard for me to imagine he doesn't succeed. I am very critical of Kirk Cousins. I think he's a little bit overpaid. I think he's a little bit overrated. But regardless, I just do not see how a quarterback of his caliber is going to struggle in such a perfect situation that he's in. You saw a guy like Desmond Ritter, who is just a horrible quarterback. And if he ever starts for another NFL team again, we're going to see how bad of a quarterback he is. He was able to get this team at least in playoff contention with how great of a roster they had. I think Kirk Cousins is going to take that over the top. AJ Terrell, Simmons, Bates, and Hughes make for a pretty good secondary. The only questionable part for them in their whole roster, in my opinion, is their linebackers. Because if you even look at their D-line, Jarrett, Onyemata, Harrison, and Judon is a really, really good D-line. So their D-line and their secondary are pretty good. Their linebackers are a little bit questionable, but that's not really a big worry for me. They're one of the best teams on paper in the entire NFL. I was very, very high on them last year going into the year. I talked about how great of a roster they were. I said they don't have many holes. A lot of the similar stuff that I'm saying last year, that I said last year, is what I'm saying this year. The only difference is last year, the biggest caveat was, are they going to be able to find a quarterback? All they need to do is find a quarterback, whether they trade for one or Ritter becomes good. If they can find a quarterback, they're going to be a playoff team. They're going to be an elite team. Well, they have their quarterback now. So I think they're going to be an elite team, regardless of how I feel about Kirk Cousins. I am all over the Falcons once again this year.
Yeah, and I wasn't really with you last year, but this year I definitely am with you.
And the Texans.
Yeah, and you were on the Texans last year. Yeah. I like the addition of Kirk Cousins. I think he could be the perfect quarterback for this team with bringing in a complete new coaching staff, which is another big addition for them, losing Arthur Smith, or addition by subtraction, as you like to say. I love bringing in Raheem Morris. I think he can be a great head coach for them. He was a DC for the Rams. He has home ties to Atlanta. He brings a lot of the Rams coaches with him. Zach Robinson, who was their QB coach, is now their offensive coordinator. Jimmy Lake was their assistant head coach. He is now the DC there. And you bring in a guy like Kirk Cousins, a vet quarterback. I think he'll be good with mentoring Michael Penix a little bit. And if Kirk Cousins doesn't perform how they need him to, I think Michael Penix can step in and be very, very good. I think he's going to be a great quarterback when he gets his chance to actually play. They still have the phenomenal running back in Bijan Robinson, and they have the backup in Algier. They also drafted Jason McClellan, which could be a guy who steps in for him if there's an injury. I think this offense is going to be great. Their offensive line is phenomenal, just like it was last year. Maybe 2024 is the season Kyle Pitts finally breaks out. The only issue I have with this offense is maybe their receivers aren't as deep as some of the other teams. I don't think the receiving core is that deep. I like Drake London. I think the addition of Darnell Mooney is very good. I like Ray McCloud, but after that, there's really not too much there. So I think Kyle Pitts is going to have a big season, saying that for maybe the millionth time. I love the additions they made this week in bringing in Matt Judon. I think that is huge for them. That could be phenomenal. Justin Simmons, I was begging the Colts to go and sign him. They put Justin Simmons next to Jesse Bates, and that could be a very, very scary safety duo. They got AJ Terrell at corner, Mike Hughes and D. Alford, who could be maybe not as deep there as well, but AJ Terrell is phenomenal, and the linebackers are just okay, but I'm very high on this team. I think they're going to be very good, and they should win this division.
All right, moving on here to the Carolina Panthers. They added Robert Hunt, Deontay Johnson, Damian Lewis, Jadeveon Clowney, A'Shawn Robinson, DJ Woonem, Josie Joel, Dane Jackson, and they drafted Xavier Legette. Their biggest loss was, of course, Brian Burns, who they had to trade. They also lost Frankie Luvo, Yetur Gross-Matos, Dante Jackson, Shaquille Griffin, Jeremy Chin, DJ Chark, and CJ Henderson. So a lot of roster overload for the worst team in the league last year, which you definitely expect from the worst team. Definitely a better offensive roster around Bryce Young. That's no question. Johnson, Thielen, Legette, and Mingo make for a pretty good wide receiver core for Bryce Young in year 2, which I mean, his O line is mid at best, but they're not horrible. They have Moton, Hunt, and Lewis, which are all solid options. So you have a pretty good receiving core, an okay O line, not the worst O line in the league. Bryce Young is in a position where if he is good enough to be a great NFL quarterback, if he's good enough to be the number one overall pick in the draft, he can show it this year. He has the ability to show it. He didn't really last year. Now he does. So they need to see something from him. If he's really bad again, it might say a lot about him. This past defense last year was top three. Although they lost a few guys on the back end, I can't imagine that they completely fall off. I think they're going to have another solid pass defense. Their run defense and pass rush are massive concerns for me on defense. I do not have them too far below the third place team in this division, but I do not think they're going to be too good. I will say they are a better roster than last year. The biggest thing here is, can Bryce Young be good?
Yeah, I like a lot of the moves they made, specifically the coaching changes. Frank Reich obviously was fired during the season last year after being very, very poor. I love bringing in Dave Canales from the division rival that we'll talk about here soon from Tampa Bay. He was their offensive coordinator before that. He was the quarterback coach, I think, for the Seattle Seahawks. He helped get Geno Smith looking like a great quarterback. Last year, he made Baker Mayfield look very good. I think that's going to be very good for Bryce Young, and hopefully can help his development. He finally has some receivers to throw to with Deontay Johnson coming in. They drafted Xavier Legette. Those two could be very good for them. Mingo, I guess, has been pretty good in camp, which could be something that'll be very good for them. They have Chuba Hubbard still. I like drafting Jonathan Brooks. He was the number one running back selected in the draft. He's going to be out until about week 3 or week 4, but I think when he steps in, he could be very good for them. With the mid offensive line, I think this offense is going to take a step forward. They brought in Damian Lewis, who I think could be good for them, and Robert Hunt. This offensive line it's going to be better than last year. The offense as a whole will be better than last year. It's just, can Dave Canales get Bryce Young to the spot where he looks like a good NFL quarterback? Defensively, like you said, they lost their best player. They were able to keep their defensive coordinator though, Ihiro Evero, who was phenomenal for him last year. He had this defense looking good, even though they were the worst defense or the worst team in the NFL. They were able to bring in 2 different linemen in DJ Wanham and Jadeveon Clowney, 2 guys who are from South Carolina already, some hometown guys. They get Shaq Thompson back, which could be good for them. Hopefully J.C. Horn, who has struggled with injuries a lot so far in his career, can stay healthy. And then they bring in a guy like Josie Jewell to replace their loss in Frankie Louvu. And this defense is going to be solid. They still got Derek Brown. They're able to kind of recreate Brian Burns. I think their defense will be okay, and I think their offense is going to take a step forward. I wouldn't put them out of not finishing last in this division.
I agree with that. Moving on here too, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're the third team we're going to talk about today that just basically did nothing in the offseason. They added Jordan Whitehead, Randy Gregory, and Ben Bredesen, as well as drafting the center out of Duke, Graham Barton, in the draft. They lost Shaq Barrett to another team and then retirement. They lost Carlton Davis in a trade, and Devin White, who, as you know, I like to say might be addition by subtraction. Pretty uneventful offseason as far as adds and losses, but like the other team that we talked about that had that, the Colts, they did re-sign and extend a ton of guys. Baker, Tristan Wirfs, Antoine Winfield, and Mike Evans all got extensions or re-signed. 4 of their best players, arguably maybe their 4 best players to a certain extent, although they didn't lose a high quantity of impact players. Guys like Shaq Barrett and Carlton Davis were both top 4 defensive players for them last year, with Vita Vea and with Antoine Winfield. So I think their defense is definitely going to get hurt from losing those 2 guys. Their run defense was phenomenal last year with Vita Vea. They're going to continue to be great once again. I think they are going to really miss Carlton Davis. He was cornerback 1, guarding wide receiver 1s for most of the year last year. But the pass defense without him, I don't think is going to be horrible, but I do think they will take a hit. Pass rush definitely should be a weakness without Shaq Barrett. I see that as maybe the biggest weakness of this entire team. With on the offensive end, they have great weapons as they've had for many, many years now, and a mid O line outside of Wirfs. Baker should be good again. He's in a almost identical situation offensively as he was last year, and he was great last year outside of not having his coordinator in Canales, like you said. The thing for them though is I hinted at it earlier. they need to get the run game going. It really, really hurt them last year, especially towards the end of the year when they lost to the Lions. They were one of the worst running teams in the league last year, despite Rachaad White having a good fantasy football season. They still had a very, very bad run game. It really doesn't make it any easier on a quarterback like Baker if he doesn't have a run game. If they can get that going, I could see them being another playoff team, maybe win another playoff game. But if they can't, I just can't see them getting away with that for back-to-back years.
Yeah, they lost Dave Canales, like I just touched on, to the Panthers. They bring in Liam Cohen from the University of Kentucky. He was the Kentucky offensive coordinator, and before that was with the LA Rams.
We'll be on another team soon.
What do you mean
He,
by that?
he has no loyalty. Look at his career path. He's
Oh,
been there one
you're
year
saying
at each team, and
I
then they
thought you meant he
leave.
was that good.
He
Okay,
was at
well,
Kentucky. He went to the Rams. He went back to
to
Kentucky.
be
He was there for a
fair,
year, then went back to Tampa Bay. Like the guy has no
yeah.
loyalty at all.
Was he good though?
He was solid, but he has no loyalty.
Okay, I think that's going to be the biggest thing for them, especially Baker Mayfield. We saw him finally get a little bit of a career rejuvenation with the Buccaneers last season. I think he deserved comeback player of the year, but that doesn't really matter in this preview. They bring in Jalen McMillan as well. He looks like he could be their third string wide receiver behind Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I like Trey Palmer. They're going to have a great receiving core still. Like you said, the offense is very similar, if not the same. Their offensive line is towards the middle. It should be able to get the job done, though. This offense is really just going to rely on if Liam Cohen can have success like Dave Canales did and how good he was last season. Rachaad White, I think he's going to be good again. And overall in the passing game, I'd like to see him run a little bit more. They drafted Bucky Irving. Maybe they're going to use him more as just a straight running back. Defensively, this team, they were able to bring back the big piece in Antoine Winfield, one of the best safeties in the NFL. They still got Vita Vea. Kalijah Cansey was very good towards the end of last season. I expect that to continue for him. Just kind of a little bit of an issue at linebacker, losing some guys, trying to replace them. But I think overall, I think this defense is going to be very similar to what they were last year. I think Todd Bowles will have them playing solid. Hopefully, Levante Davis can continue to play great football. And this is a tough division to kind of rank outside of one.
Yep, but that's the next thing we're doing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I have the Falcons at one, of course. It's not actually very tough for me outside of one. It's very tough after two. It's easily the Bucks for at two for me. That's not even a question. The debate here for me is the Panthers and the Saints. I see the Saints as a team that could be really, really, really bad. Like, I mean, and the Panthers are just a team that we know can be really bad. The difference for me is the Saints have more great individual players than the Panthers have, like Kamara, Olave, Cam Jordan, Lattimore, Mario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu. They have a lot of really good players who could be impact players on really good teams and win teams playoff games. The Panthers don't have that as much. I'm a little worried if Bryce Young starts off bad. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about it. I know maybe you can make some excuses for him. I've made some excuses for him, but at the end of the day, he needs to be better. For that reason, I have the Panthers at four. So I have Falcons, Bucks, Saints, Panthers, but the Saints and the Panthers are so close for me.
Yeah, the easy one for me, I have Falcons at one. After that, have it kind of close. I'm going to go Bucks two. I'm just hoping that even the loss of Dave Canales will still be okay enough for the Buccaneers to continue to have some of the success that they did last year. I don't expect them to make the playoffs, though, this year. I think this is just going to be a one-bid division with the Falcons winning it. At three, I am going to go with the Panthers. I think bringing in Dave Canales as the OC and having Bryce Young hopefully develop into a quarterback that we expected him to be. For that reasons, I have them at three, and then the Saints at four. They have a lot of holes in their team. They have some positions where they're great, like you said, but that offensive line scares me a lot. I think that's by far the worst offensive line in this division, and kind of an aging defense scares me a little bit. I could see them maybe selling off a few guys at the deadline. So for that reason, I have the Saints at four.
All right, we'll finish off today's episode with the division awards here for the NFC South, starting with Offensive Rookie of the Year. I went with Tylese Fuaga from the Saints. I think he needs to be the best O-lineman on the Saints this year for them to even be able to salvage how bad this O-line's going to be. I think if he breaks out early and they notice he's good, I think he's going to definitely have his hands full being the best O-lineman on this team. But regardless, I really think he has some good raw skills, and I think he's going to be definitely somebody on this Saints team that makes enough of an impact that they can maybe get over having such a bad O-line if you have one guy that is salvageable.
I have Jonathan Brooks, running back from the Panthers, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think when he steps in week 3 or week 4, I think he's going to kind of take over. And I have this team finishing third, so that probably means they're going to have to win some games that they're not expected to. I think he's going to help with that. I think he's going to be great with Bryce Young. He was one of the better running backs in the college football until he tore his ACL last season. I think he's going to come back and maybe struggle a week or two, but I think he should be able to pick it up and play very good. And if he doesn't dominate this year, I expect him to dominate next year.
All right, at DROY, I have OROY from Clemson playing with the Atlanta Falcons. He's going to be replacing Calais Campbell for the Falcons, playing next to Grady Jarrett. He's playing with so many great D linemen. He's going to learn so much. He's probably going to start at some point this year and stay a starter. I think he's going maybe the weakest point of this D line at this very moment in his career. I don't think he's going to end up that as time goes on, but I think he's going to learn a ton. I think he's going to progress a ton, and he's going to be one of the surprise defensive picks that went later in the draft due to all the offensive players going so early.
Yeah, I didn't really know who to pick here, but I went with Kool-Aid McKinstry from the Saints. I think with some possible injuries that they have, I think he's banged up too, but he could get some playing time with the Saints. This defense is getting older. I think he's going to be on the field a little bit, and I think he could dominate and kind of start developing into that future with Paulson Adebo.
All right. Offensive player of the year. The offensive player of the year and MVP were kind of tough for me in this division, but I went with Bijan. I think the threat of the pass game that wasn't there in Atlanta over the past last year is definitely going to be there now with Kirk and all these weapons. I think that's going to just open up the run game even more for Bijan. And like I said, I think they have a top 3, 4 O line in the entire league. I think he's going to really reap the benefits and hit his stride. And I think him and Gibbs are going to be part of a running back class that gets looked at for a long time.
Yeah, I also went with Bijan Robinson. I agree that once you get to MVP's division, it's kind of tough. I almost wanted to put Bijan there, but I went with OPOY for Bijan. He's got that great offensive line, like you said. He doesn't have Arthur Smith there to hold him back too much. I think Tyler Algier will still be on the field a lot, maybe in the red zone, but I think Bijan's going to get the ball a lot more, especially in the passing game, and be very good. So I got Bijan at OPOY.
All right, at DPOY, I didn't have to hit the backspace button one time from last year. I'm rocking with my boy Jesse Bates once again. He proved me right last year. He was a huge addition, one of the biggest additions in the league. He's going to stay in Atlanta. I think he's going to continue to be great for them and make impactful plays as a ball hawk, but also just as a coverage safety and continue to be the leader of this defense in Atlanta for a defense that I think is going to be pretty good.
I went with Antoine Winfield. He was one of the best safeties in the entire NFL last season with the Buccaneers. He got paid. I think he's going to stay motivated and continue to prove how good he was and lead this defense again like he did last season. So I have him at DPOY.
Yeah, I think he was one of the few guys that was an all pro, but not a pro bowler this year. But yes, moving on to MVP, I swallowed my pride and had to take Kirk Cousins, not because I think he's the most talented quarterback in the league, not because I think he's worth this contract, not because I think he's going to be able to miraculously cover from a torn Achilles in his late 30s, but I think he's just in the perfect situation, and it's just hard for me to imagine any quarterback that I consider. I consider Kirk to be top half of the league when you look at the 32 quarterbacks. And when I look at this Falcons team empty without a quarterback, I think any of those top 16 guys would be great in that situation. So for that reason, I have Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I got Kirk Cousins as well. I think he's in the best position. He's got some great weapons in Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. I consider putting Mike Evans here, but I really would have probably put him at OPOY and maybe move Bijan up. But I have Kirk Cousins as MVP. I think he's going to have a great season. He's coming off a torn Achilles, so maybe that slows him down. He just has to stay healthy. He's got the phenomenal O-line, probably the best O-line he has had in his career to block for him. I think he's going to have a great season and win MVP of this division.
All right. So that about does it for this episode of the Engage 8 podcast. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit any of those links in our description for Spotify, TikTok, all that good stuff. We will be back next week for our final division preview of the AFC and NFC North. And then after that, we'll be moving on to our week 1 preview. So thank you everybody for watching and listening out there. We'll see everybody in the next one.